A 10% tariff on Canada's natural gas and energy exports, just one announcement from President Trump, yet it set off a chain reaction that shook the global energy market. This single move sparked a surprising shift that's now challenging America's dominance in the energy world. And it didn't stop with Canada. Before Washington could even respond, over 180 countries were affected, and Qatar quickly rerouted its gas supplies directly into Europe. Picture this. Massive gas pipelines that once channeled energy into Texas and New York are now being diverted to Germany, France, and the UK. A new wave of energy alliances is emerging. So what happens now that America's closest energy partners are turning away? Could Trump be forced to reverse course if this triggers a major retaliation from Canada and Qatar? Let's explore the full picture in today's video. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our latest updates. At the start of 2025, right after being sworn in again, President Trump imposed a 10% tariff on oil and gas imported from Canada. What followed was an unexpected crisis between the two neighbors. Reuters reports that Canada supplied almost half of all crude oil imported into the United States, around 4 million barrels daily. But as of March 2025, this vital supply faced a tariff worth a tenth of its total value. The blow wasn't just to Canada. U.S. refining companies, already struggling to secure cheap and steady oil, were hit hard. Meanwhile, Canada was left looking for new buyers for the millions of barrels it used to sell daily, since 90% of its oil exports were headed to the United States. Now, instead of shipping to Texas or Louisiana, Canadian liquefied natural gas is flowing to Europe, where countries are rushing to fill reserves in the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine energy crisis. According to the International Energy Agency, in the first quarter of 2025, Europe's LNG imports jumped 23% year-over-year. That's over 9 billion cubic meters of additional gas. And Qatar wasn't about to miss out. Long known for having the lowest LNG production costs in the world, Qatar seized this moment. Reuters notes that Doha has begun expanding its export capacity from 77 million tons annually to 142 million tons by 2030. An 85% increase aimed at supplying both Europe and Asia. This isn't just opportunism, it's strategic. Qatar is actively using the U.S. tariff decision to grow its influence, forcing the White House to reconsider both its energy approach and its relationships with key allies. What began as a domestic tariff policy is now turning into a high-stakes global game. By mid-2025, the 10% tariff on Canadian gas officially kicked in. Few in Washington expected this would mark a major shift in the North American energy equation. Until then, the U.S. was Canada's only real customer for gas. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Canada exported roughly 8.66 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day via pipeline in 2024, up from 8.0 in 2023, and higher than the five-year average of 7.5 billion from 2018 to 2022. The highest recorded was 10.4 BCFD back in 2002. Now, nearly half of what U.S. refineries and power plants depended on was subject to higher costs. Canada had no choice. It needed new customers in Europe and Asia. This wasn't just a penalty. Many saw it as a veiled response to growing trade disputes with China. Canada acted fast. It accelerated the LNG Canada Project in Kitimat, British Columbia, its first major LNG export terminal, with a capacity of 14 million tons per year and initial shipments expected by mid-2025. This project became Canada's strategic response, allowing it to enter the European and Asian energy markets directly. Images of massive LNG ships departing from Port Kitimat now symbolize Canada's energy shift. But this wasn't a one-off. Canada is expanding its full energy infrastructure, from the 670-kilometer Coastal GasLink pipeline to upgraded ports and storage sites, all designed to reduce reliance on the U.S. market. The $40 billion pipeline, capable of moving 2 billion cubic feet of gas per day, now links the Montney gas fields straight to export terminals. The result? Immediate impact. U.S. gasoline prices in eastern states jumped by 20 to 40 cents per gallon in just the first month after the tariff. Refineries, ports, and processing plants began to feel the heat. Stellantis, for instance, shut down operations and laid off 900 workers at its Windsor, Michigan plant due to higher fuel and parts costs. That number has now soared to 4,500. A decision that once seemed minor has now created a tidal wave. Canada has responded with agility, turning a looming crisis into a strategic win. Meanwhile, the U.S. faces a serious dilemma: how to ensure energy security and protect jobs when its own policy has triggered rising costs and supply disruptions. What's your take on Trump's move against Canada? While Canada pivots west, Qatar pushes forward. From exporting 77 million tons of LNG in 2024, it's already on track to reach 142 million tons by 2030. That's an 85% surge in just 6 years. The backbone of this effort, the North Field Expansion Project, Qatar's crown jewel in its mission to dominate the LNG market. By the end of this decade, Qatar aims to control nearly a quarter of the global LNG trade, cementing its position as the world's top gas supplier. And Qatar isn't just boosting its capacity on paper. It's taking action by locking in long-term deals with top European energy players. In October 2023, Qatar Energy and Total Energies finalized a 27-year agreement to deliver 3.5 million tons of LNG annually to France, starting in 2026 and running through the mid-2050s. Just days after, Qatar struck a similar 27-year deal with Shell in the Netherlands, this time for 2 million tons per year. These are bold, strategic moves aimed at replacing Russian gas, exactly when the EU is scrambling for alternatives. Europe's demand for LNG is skyrocketing. According to the International Energy Agency, the EU's LNG imports are set to rise 25% in 2025, an additional 33 billion cubic meters, pushing volumes close to record highs. Why? Because Russian pipeline flows through Nord Stream and others have almost come to a stop, leaving Europe no choice but to fill the gap with LNG imports. At the same time, gas storage is becoming critical. At the end of winter, storage levels were just 34% full. To ensure homes stay heated next winter, the EU must refill tanks to 90% capacity fast. But these deals with Qatar may face pushback. Thanks to the EU's tough new environmental regulations, the Due Diligence Directive demands gas suppliers meet both carbon emission and human rights standards, with new reporting rules coming into effect in 2027. Qatar now finds itself in a strategic position, ready to request exemptions or even threaten supply cuts if it's hit with excessive penalties. Meanwhile, the U.S. is trying to ramp up LNG exports to compete, but it's falling behind due to outdated infrastructure. At CERAWeek in March 2025, industry leaders warned that without major new pipelines and deepwater terminals, U.S. export potential will hit a bottleneck, even as demand hits its highest level in 15 years. And those 2 new U.S. LNG terminals? They won't be operational until 2026 or 2027, so European buyers are likely to turn to Qatar, at least for the next 2 years. In this race for Europe's energy market, Qatar not only enjoys the lowest production costs in the world, it's also winning on the diplomatic front, consistently offering long-term partnerships. Washington, on the other hand, is facing internal pressure, higher domestic energy prices, and growing public concern. Qatar isn't just plugging the Russian gas hole, it's taking the lead, making strategic moves while the U.S. struggles to build. When Europe found itself at a major geopolitical crossroads, looking for reliable energy after the main Russian gas pipeline via Ukraine was shut down because Moscow and Ankara didn't renew their deal, Russia's share of EU gas fell from 40% pre-war to under 10% in just a few months. That forced EU countries to secure long-term supply from Canada and Qatar. To avoid future shortages, Brussels quickly turned to LNG projects from both nations. A leaked European Commission draft revealed a plan to directly invest in LNG facilities abroad, even if it means high costs or political risk. Canada, with its LNG Canada Project, and Qatar, through its massive contracts with Total Energies and Shell, have become the EU's new energy lifelines, helping to ensure supply stability for at least the next 2 decades. LNG is no longer just a commodity, it's now a key diplomatic tool. Qatar is using environmental exemptions to offer competitive prices, while Canada leans on its G7 partnership to negotiate favorable terms. The IEA reports that LNG now makes up over 35% of Europe's gas imports, and the EU is even considering a 20 billion cubic meter strategic reserve to cushion against future supply shocks. Meanwhile, American households, though the U.S. is a big player in LNG, are feeling the pinch. Domestic gas prices have shot up nearly 80% year over year due to record volumes being exported and the ripple effects of Trump's tariff policies. This has left many families in eastern U.S. states facing hundreds of extra dollars in heating and power bills each winter. As the U.S. government focuses on exports to maintain global influence, its infrastructure is falling behind, creating a paradox. Despite being an energy giant, the American public remains uneasy about energy costs and reliability. From a 10% tariff on Canadian gas to the new global energy map drawn by Qatar and Canada, the U.S. is navigating a challenging landscape. Should Trump reconsider his tariffs now that the damage is hitting his own citizens? Because Canada and Qatar have quietly sidestepped U.S. pressure by boosting LNG exports, the U.S. is slowly becoming isolated on the global energy front. Back in 2024, the U.S. had a 45% share of LNG exports to Europe. It was the leading supplier. But by early 2025, things took a sharp turn. Brussels didn't hesitate to sign long-term deals with Ottawa and Doha. These agreements do more than guarantee supply. They represent a new era. Europe is no longer dividing its energy dependencies between Washington, Berlin, and Paris. It's now building an entirely new competitive energy network, one that leaves the old system behind. Amid this backdrop, the U.S. go-it-alone tariff approach has seriously backfired. When low-cost natural gas from Canada and Qatar began pouring into European ports, U.S. natural gas futures jumped 8% in March 2025, hitting nearly $4 per million British thermal units, the biggest increase in years. Consumers across the United States are feeling the pain, with heating bills and electricity rates rising sharply. In the eastern states, gas prices at the pump have hit all-time highs. To deal with this, Washington has been forced to fast-track major upgrades to the country's gas infrastructure. Storage sites and pipelines, already stretched to their limits, now need rapid expansion. LNG export terminals are also being prioritized for major upgrades to meet the growing global demand. At the same time, the United States government is rushing to negotiate with Brussels to ease some methane-related restrictions. The goal? To quickly restore its position in Europe's energy market. But what's even more notable is how LNG has shifted from being just a commercial product to a powerful diplomatic tool. Qatar is using every European Union environmental loophole and tariff break it can to keep its export prices at the lowest levels. Meanwhile, Canada is relying on its G7 membership and deep-rooted diplomatic ties to secure incredibly flexible deals, some lasting up to 20 years. Because of these smart moves, both Ottawa and Doha now enjoy serious advantages at the negotiation table. Meanwhile, as Canada and Qatar deepen their relationships with the European Union, the U.S. is steadily losing its grip on global gas pricing and supply routes, even within its own sphere of influence. Now, U.S. energy policy is entering a zone of uncertainty. Will Washington stick to its tough protectionist path, risking global relevance? Or will it shift gears, open up to more international cooperation, invest in shared infrastructure, and relax some of its restrictions to regain its lead? This choice will decide whether the U.S. remains a top-tier energy power or falls behind in a fast-changing global energy race. Following a series of unilateral tariffs, starting with a 10% duty on Canadian gas, the global energy market was shaken. Rather than keeping control, Washington unintentionally sparked a major shift. Both Ottawa and Doha acted quickly, signing long-term contracts with the EU to fill a 33 billion cubic meter shortfall left by cutbacks in Russian supply. As a result, EU LNG imports are expected to climb 25% in 2025. From modest roles, Canada and Qatar have now become essential players, reshaping the energy map alongside the United States. Instead of helping Americans, the tariffs ended up backfiring badly. While the U.S. struggles, Canada and Qatar continue to leverage their strong relationships with Europe to stay competitive, turning LNG into a diplomatic asset. Now, Washington is stuck between two conflicting goals: shielding local jobs and consumers with protectionist policies, or preserving its leadership role in the global energy arena to avoid becoming isolated. In my view, the U.S. Step 1. Begin reducing trade barriers with trusted allies like Canada. At the same time, expand public-private partnerships to boost investments in LNG storage, pipelines, and port infrastructure. Step 2. Widen the market by signing flexible bilateral deals with key partners in Europe and Asia, balancing strategic goals with economic benefits. Step 3. Use revenue from LNG exports to speed up the clean energy transition. Investing in green infrastructure will reduce reliance on fossil fuels and improve long-term global competitiveness. Only by mixing moderate protectionism, strong infrastructure investment, and smart international cooperation can the U.S. regain its momentum and reclaim its leadership role in global energy. In today's complex energy and political landscape, this balanced approach is how America and its allies can avoid being left behind. What's your take on this? Drop a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our latest deep dive analysis videos.